Welcome, everybody, wherever you are. Thank you for joining us for the last season of the Adam online programs. And the December online program is curated by our lovely Angela Go. The title of the whole event is, sorry, it's very long. Let me check the title again. Time Dress Up as a ghost and arrives to the party dripping. Um, Today we're gonna have the first event of this time dress up party dripping, and I'm gonna briefly introduce Angela Go. Angela Go is a dancer and choreographer based in Sydney, from Australia. Her work poses possibilities for disruption and transformation inside the aesthetics and conditions of techno-capitalism, um, planetary and post anthropons, and make shapes across the various of form and setting and context of visual art, performing arts, and so on. All right. So I'm gonna pass the floor to Ange to introduce the program and introduce the artist today.
Thank you, River. Welcome, everybody. My name is Angela, and as River said, I'm an artist and dancer and choreographer. I am joining tonight from Gadigal country in Sydney, and hope that you're all having a good morning, evening, or daytime, wherever, depending on where you're joining from. So River and TPAC invited me to curate this last program for Adam. I was part of the Adam Artist Lab in, I think it was 2018. And so the Adam Artist Lab is usually a kind of group residency, international group residency. And so while that's not possible with travel being fairly difficult in the pandemic, things have moved online, and there's been different sessions curated by different people aligned with Adam or TPAC. And so for my session, it's my first time curating something, and so I just did it how I thought it should happen. I don't really have a curatorial practice as such. So I just thought about people that I think are doing things that I am interested in and curious about, and that I thought that others would be interested and curious about too. So starting tonight or today, we have Jassem Hindi, and then I'll run through the artist first, and then I'll come back to Jassem. And then tomorrow we have Sue Yushin, and then Brian Fawata, and then Verity Mackey, and then the last session is by Riverlyn himself, who has invited a bunch of guests also to join. So tonight it's a great pleasure to introduce Jassem. Jassem is an artist, writer, working with sound, performance, writing, sharing across a bunch of different forms and expressions of thinking and art. And Jassem, I think I first encountered you, I was trying to think just before when we first met, and I actually can't pinpoint when we first met, but I know that we encountered each other sometimes for the first time at PAF in France. But then I was thinking that actually the first time I met you may have been in Vienna in 2012, when you may have been doing the kind of sound / DJing maybe for a Keith Hennessy workshop that I participated in. And I think that could have been the first time I met you, but it's been a pleasure to speak to you around this process of getting you here tonight. And so Jassem is going to present a lecture called Betraying Utopia and Slime Utopia. And it's something that I saw that Jassem was presenting in places where I couldn't be. And I was very curious about it from afar. So this seemed like a great opportunity to understand what that was. So now I'll just pass to you, Jassem.
Thank you. Hello. Hi. I hope everybody's hearing me well. So thank you so much for having me. I'm very excited about that. It's really a pleasure. So I will talk to you about this concept of utopia a little bit. But I'll give you just maybe some background so that we see where we're coming from and where we're going with this together. So this lecture was curated for a dance festival some time ago. And since then, I've been accumulating material around this idea of utopia, betraying utopia and slime utopia. And so in a way, the lecture doesn't have a particular audience. It's not specific to, for instance, people that come from performance or philosophy or poetry, but it has elements of those three. So at the beginning, I will have to be a little bit, there are some historical aspects that I have to go through just so that we have a common ground on which to sit. Yeah. Anyways, and also one last thing I would like to add is that please feel free to ask any questions in the chat. At some point during the lecture, I will just stop to be able to read some of the questions and bounce from them. Yeah, bounce off them. Okay, let's start. So so just a basic definition, so it's easier to start there. So utopia, I'm just refreshing your memory. Utopia is a very simple word. It just means a place without space. So utopia, it's a non-space, which is a bit strange when you think about what a utopia is. The word came to us from Thomas More, who wrote a book called Utopia. But the first definition that we have of utopia for me comes from the Roman legal system, where in the Roman legal system there's a declaration that says quid est in territorio est de territorio, which means who is in the territory is of the territory, or to say differently, who is in the land is of the land. So that is the first utopian declaration, which is wherever you are, you actually belong to it immediately. So that is the first approach that I will have to utopia, of the idea of territory and land. And then another quote that I would like to offer you is from Ernst Bloch, who wrote a book that he started writing it in 1915 and ended it in 1917. It's a book about a utopia, about the spirit of utopia. It's a very romantic book on what is a utopia. And it starts, this is the very first line, it's translated from German. And he says, I am, we are, there is no need for more. Now we can begin. Life has been put in our hands. And this fantastic beginning, I am, we are, there is no need for more. There is no need for preparation. There is no need for a selection of who can be here or who cannot be here, what you need to present, the apparatus that you need to bring with you. So it's a very, very simple and very utopian way to think about what is welcomed in, you know. The last thing I want to add before we start is that, so this is of course a completely virtual space that we are in, but I'm in the habit when I meet people, especially if it's a big group of people and you are here to listen to me for at least an hour, I usually bring either, I don't know, chocolate, fruits, something we can share together so that we can, just break bread, so to speak, together. And of course, this is not possible virtually. So the other thing that I can offer you is a poem. It's an easy gift, you know. So this has almost nothing to do with the lecture. It's just a poem that I give you, a bit like, you know, chocolate or fruit. It's a poem by Rasha Omran, who is a Syrian poet. She lives now in Egypt, but she used to work a lot in Syria as a poet, and also as a curator. And she wrote a poem called "Ordinary Life," which is actually quite well translated. So this is for you. It's for nothing really. So ordinary life. I do nothing but wait. I write, catching words as though I were in a field filled with colorful butterflies fleeing from me. I read what others write, and I'm impressed by their excessive eloquence in saying what they want. I invent a love and call a charming man my lover, and I really do love him. I am overcome with passion and ecstasy. I clean my house daily, covering the walls with paintings so as not to live alone in a too large house. I go to sleep, wake up, watch cheesy romantic films, cook, punish myself with a greasy meal. I walk and take my pills regularly and make plans with friends and dance often. I do everything that indicates that my life is ordinary, like the life of so many others, except that really I do nothing but wait for some moment, though I don't know which. Not Godot's arrival, as you might be thinking, a moment that concerns me alone. And I do all of the above just to know what it is. That's it. That's the poem. I will not comment too much on it for now. Okay. Bon, I'll give you the program and then we can start. So what we're going to do here is in more or less 3 steps. The first step is a rough definition of utopia, but also we're going to go through very quickly to what I call the classical critique of utopia. So the very classical understanding of how utopia has been criticized from the beginning of the 20th century until today. So it's just like one shape. The second will be a definition of what I call betraying utopia. So this methodology of betrayal that is as much a method and a style. Thirdly, this idea of what is slime utopia, which is this idea of a speculative practice of utopia or a silent practice of utopia that has to do a lot with performance and poetry. And in the background, I will be coming back and forth to 2 concepts. The first one is the concept of ontology, which I will explain, it's not that complicated. And the second one is hospitality. So there's a tension between ontology or haunting and hospitality that I build my work around it. So that's the plan. Now for the method, I have to say that I am not a big fan of linear lectures, or I'm not capable of linear lectures. So I might be repeating myself a few times. That's part of the nonlinear, practice. And also I might jump from one. I'm just going to open a few doors, and I'm not going to try to close or conclude on anything. I have no interest in doing that whatsoever. So the idea is more to provide you with material for you to think on, nothing more than that. I'm not here to give you big conclusions about utopia. Anyway, so a classical critique, I'm not going to talk about the history of utopia because that doesn't really make any sense, but let's say that a classical critique of utopia would be to say that it's to analyze it as a symptom of the author or a symptom of the context or the cultural context in which the utopia has been written, basically saying that tell me what utopia you wrote, and I will tell you what disease your society is sick with. So, or tell me what is not welcomed within your utopia, and I will tell you who you are. So immediately there's this relationship of hospitality, of who can be inside the space and who cannot be in the space, right? So the major critique of utopia will be about that, like of this idea of a gated community that is outside of time, So classically, utopia would be thought of like as a space that is separated from the other spaces. And my very humble claim is to say that actually it's not about space. It is the fact that a utopia is a space without time, a space that has no tolerance whatsoever for transformation, for microhistory, etc., etc. But the classical critique of utopia always has this like warning, this idea of like a symptom, a disease. Jean-Luc Nancy, for instance, a French philosopher, says this, and I have to say it in French first so I can translate it. He says, méfiez-vous de toute assumption de la communauté. Be suspicious of all assumptions within a community. Another way to look at it is to say, for instance, like, tell me what utopia you have, and I will show you what kind of monsters you are hiding. So this idea of monster is going to be very important for us. The tension between the concept of chimera and the concept of a monster. I will come back to this, don't worry. Then there's like, I would say, critiques of utopia that caricature utopia to its maximum, or radicalize the idea of utopia in order to show us its monstrosity in a way, or its limitations. The first one is perhaps the least famous one. It comes from Pierre Klossowski, who was a French writer, and he wrote a book called The Living Currency in the 20th century. And basically, he radicalizes the idea of utopia by saying that it is every utopia is wanting to be paid in objects of sensation, that we want to be paid in living beings, objects of pleasure. So the idea that the end game of utopia is maximalizing pleasure. And another one that is perhaps more famous is the 120 Days of Sodoma by Marquis de Sade, and then the subsequent movie by Pier Paolo Pasolini, the 120 Days, where utopia is basically it is the mind of one author. So it is an entire society that is controlled by the desire and the satisfaction of the pleasures of one. So this idea that it's to control in order to satisfy the totality of one person's libidinal condition. It's completely in opposition, for instance, with the work of someone like Fred Moten, who's very famously said that we have to consent to not be a single being, so it's like in complete opposition. That would be a very classical critique of utopia, that the political subconscious of a utopia is to be a single being and to control all the other bodies around it. So the other bodies are nothing more than the objects of libidinal desire, right? So and added to that, as an appendix to this critique of utopia, there's this idea that the cities and the characters in the utopia are paper thin. There's no actual because there's no transformation, there is no time. The characters don't need to be very elaborate. So it's always aspected towards the desire of the author, right? So you don't need anyone to have some sort of personality in that sense. So I can speak like this very lightly. But we will come back to this. Don't worry. This is just to warm up a little bit the concepts that we're going to use in a second. The main trait that we have to remember is this idea of utopia as a place that is outside of time. And for us, in the context of this lecture, time is the capacity to transform. This is what we're going to, every time we hear the word time, we're going to think capacity to transform. So a utopian space or a utopian city is a place where there is no transformation, there's no time, and it is very much concerned with who is left behind, who is allowed, who can enter and who can't enter, right? So it's a redistribution of time and of bodies in a very, very radical way. It's Frederick Jameson, an American writer and philosopher, also talks about it by saying that a utopia is basically the circumvention of diversity through an aesthetic gesture. So first we think of the surface of the city with a list of things that you can do, list of things that should be in the city, and after that you fill it with bodies. So basically we circumvent all sorts of problems by first starting with this very strong aesthetic gesture. And because it's a place without any transformation, of course, it means that it has no relationship to the past, which is a very strong political statement. We will also come back to that, this idea that it has no interest in being in the middle of things. It is really this very classical political gesture, or this very classical understanding of the revolution as starting from scratch, as ignoring all sorts of historical heritage, and say we're going to leave and start again from zero. It's this like eschatological relationship to revolution as a gesture of purification and salvation. You know, so it's a very violent way to understand the idea of revolution. So that where there's no body in the sense of opacities that carry time within them in this revolution. There's no sliming in that sense, you know. But we will come back to this. At the complete opposite side of the spectrum, at the complete opposite side of this idea of eschatological revolution, of the idea of utopia as we need to leave the world in order to start the world anew, which is a bit strange when you think about the concept of world, of course, is this idea of betrayal. So this technique of betrayal as a political practice, as another revolutionary practice. So very simply put, betrayal, it means a few things. The first thing is that it means starting in the middle of things. So it's accepting immediately that a betrayer is someone that is going to be very comfortable with being in the midst of the walls of the enemy. So a betrayer will enter the utopia or enter the city, let's say, and start their work from there. You know, they don't exist outside of a series of differentials. You know, it needs to be there. It is nested within the walls of the city, right? So, and the technique of the betrayer will be, of course, to start with the materiality of what is there, meaning that it will use tools like, for instance, charming or perverting or imitation. Imitation is a very, very good tool when you're a betrayer. It's trying to coax effects from the world by identifying its extant tendencies and manipulating them. You know, it's this idea, it's a Greek idea of the metis, this idea of like an intelligence that attempts to make contact with an object by using connivance and opposition. You know, this whole idea of a cunning, craft and craftiness is something that has been studied a lot by many people, of course, but the people that come to my mind, the first one is Jean-Paul Vernon, who did a huge work on the concept of metis in Greek philosophy, and closer to us, the work of Benedict Singleton, who is a strategist. I think that's his position. I will write the reference down. He wrote a lot in a blog called Glass Beats, very interesting a group of people that think about these things. Anyway, I can give you an example of a betrayer in history. For instance, it would be someone like Jean Genet, for instance. I'm sorry, all these references now are very French. It will change in a second. But when you talk about the critique of utopia, it's a bit hard not to go there. But Jean Genet, for instance, is the perfect betrayer who said, for instance, very notoriously about the Palestinian cause. He said, "I will be with the Palestinians until they win. And then the day they win, I will be against them, because there will then be a nation among the nations, and then it's over. And then the whole conversation, the whole idea of a shifting playfulness with the idea of identity will be over, and it will just be this construction, and then I will leave them." So that would be like a good example of a betrayal. It's not the only one, but it's one possible example. To come back to the sort of singleton around this idea of betrayal, or this idea of the trap, it's this idea to elicit extraordinary effects from unpromising material. So it's a very realistic strategy. It's not about starting in the fantasy land. It's not about starting somewhere else. It is really starting with what is exactly in front of us, which is probably something that is rather poor material, right? So it's about we'll then have to use oblique strategies, precisely timed actions, you know. So it's all about time in order to allow for the weak to prevail. So it's always using the weaker strategies. Why is this interesting for us? Not just as a way to destroy utopia, to open the back door and let the enemies inside the utopia, this space without time, and then find a way to open the door so that time can come in and start to transform this very boring, very paper thin, very authoritarian, and very ideologically mono-ideological space. But it is also a methodology for me to be able to talk about utopia, because of course, if I needed to define the concept right now of utopia and start with like a historical and a conceptual explanation of it, it would take basically too much time. So that is also what betrayal is. It's a fantastic trick, or like Singleton would say, it's like I am building a trap. And what is a trap? A trap is a little parody of my prey. My prey is utopia, and I'm just making a little parody of what utopia actually is in order to be able to capture my prey. So it's this idea of so there's a lot of limits to what I'm saying when I'm talking about utopia. I'm just doing it in order to fulfill my purpose, you know. And this technique of betraying or of trapping is one that is also very useful, I think, in performance or in choreography, when we're doing, or in poetry also, but in any sort of artistic form, in my opinion, because it actually helps us to catch what we need from material, from any theme that we're interested in, or any material we're interested in, and really think about what we want to capture from it. So it's this idea of like the art of apparatus of capture in order to look for ways to transform it. If time-based, I prefer usually the word time-based art, because this idea is the art of bending time, of manipulating time. With this idea of manipulation, it also means that then we can transform the material we are with. So it's better to start with a little parody of what you want to trap. So to basically, a little parody in that sense means that instead of defining the biological, to have a biological definition of what is a wolf, we're going to just think of a wolf as something that has bones that can break. So my definition of wolf as a trapper or as a betrayer is to think of it as, what is a wolf? It is 4 bones that can break, and it has a certain speed. And so when I'm going to build my trap, I'm going to not think of the entirety of what a wolf is, but only of this idea of like, it is a series of bones that can break. And then from this new definition of the wolf, not only am I going to be able to capture it, but I'm also going to be able to transform the definition of what is a wolf, right? So it's going to be more a concept, and maybe a bit less of an animal. It's going to be just a different animal. So that is the trick of, or the creativity, I would say, that is hidden under the idea of lethal parody, or of betraying techniques, yeah, trapping in that sense. And one other aspect of betrayal that comes to me from Reza Negarestani, who's an Iranian philosopher and writer who now lives in New York, I think. Yes, in New York. He wrote a book called Cyclonopedia, which is essential to the work I'm doing. I'll also write down the reference a bit later. And he also uses this idea of betraying, and he says that it's the capacity, basically the betrayer is the one that has the capacity to make holes in the plot, right? So the classic betrayer or the classic traitor will be the one that sees that there's a back door in the citadel and then opens the door to let the enemies in. And Negarestani uses this in a way for this idea of to make holes inside the plot of the ideologically locked down discourse, and to find ways to poke at it, but not just to make, not as a thinking about like deconstruction or critique, like a very orthodox critique of the ideology, but just to make holes in the discourse in order not to show that the discourse is not whole, but to show that it is not holy, meaning that in order for it to exist, it needs to be discrete. Discrete means discontinuous in a mathematical way. So it means that it is only fragmentary. The betrayer is just here to show that within the nature of the writing, within the nature of the utopia, of this like consistent ideological material, it has to be built on discrete techniques. I will also come back to that and explain it. So the betrayer also, when I introduced this idea of the whole or of the poros, this betrayer also reveals something about another kind of utopia, one where time is introduced slowly. Is this idea that it has to be volatile. It cannot last for very long. Every utopia, every betrayed utopia, or every utopia that is steeped in time is one that cannot last for very long. It only comes and goes. And one way to understand it very, very quickly is this idea of how to say this. When you turn to a friend, you cooked together, or you had an amazing walk in the field, or you spent a fantastic time with them, and then you turn to them and you say like, this is the life. This is how it should be in a way, or this is how it is. This moment, that is the utopian moment that I'm referring to. Is this thing that you cannot. That if you start to explain it to people, it's over. If you start to reproduce the conditions of productions of this, let's say, magical moment, or of this very pleasurable moment, you're going to destroy that moment. And so the idea is not to think that it's untouchable, or that this is not what utopia is, that is something else. What I want to affirm is that is what utopia is when it is steeped in time. So to accept that utopia only comes to us in fragments, only comes to us in shreds. Yeah. So that is in a way the lesson of the betrayer, if I may say so. So of course there are consequences to this concept of betrayer. The first one is that it has to be a little bit unheard and a little bit unread, meaning that betrayer is not interested in being in history. It's someone that is not interested in being talked about, right? So they try to escape the text as much as they can, and that has to do with the technique, because basically, if you're a betrayer, okay, so you start in the middle of things, you hide within the walls of the citadel. You're working in the shadows, of course, and you don't worry so much about being historicized. If everybody knows your method, then your betrayal technique is not going to be very, very good anymore. And it is also this act of betrayal is also essentially a gesture of kindness, because we start with what is here. You know, it is really a radical hospitality to what is exactly in front of us. So it's really this belief that there is no blank slate, and to acknowledge that the blank slate is going to make me disappear. Or to say differently, this kind of utopia is one that maybe Derek Walcott, who was a poet, fantastic poet, wrote. He said this, he said, language is a battlefield, or to say differently, language is the battlefield, meaning that there is no reason to be somewhere else than where we are, that we have to deal with what is around us, or to say it, this is a French expression, so I don't know how it translates in English, I apologize, is to say we have to make fire out of every wood. Yeah, that in French you say, faire feu de tout bois. We have to use everything that is around us. So it's this idea of like craftiness, yeah, as opposed to the idea of directionality or idea of direction. Anyway, I won't go too much into that because that's a different subject. Also, betrayal offers us an idea of speed. So this idea that we have to be there at the right time, or that we have to find a time in order to just like change the entire scenario. So so it's not, betrayal in that sense is not about attrition. You know, it is not about attacking over and over and over. It's just about being in the midst of it. So there's no reason for attrition. It is more about getting very close to your enemy, looking like them, smelling like them, and then snapping their neck. You know, so there's also a lot of cruelty there that comes with it. You know, with this idea of kindness, there's also this very very it's not yeah, anyway. This idea is okay. So why? What does it do? So this idea is it's about letting time in, as I said. So, but okay, but what is this? What is this enemy that we're trying to let in, or who are we working for? If we are the betrayer and we are inside the utopian city. Basically, it's because utopia proposes a more joyful, because a more fragmented. More inserted into life kind of utopia, one that allows for a transformation, and of course betrays the concept of utopia as a space that is outside of time. Yeah. So in a way, it defeats itself very, very, very much. But it is betrayal is it's still a commitment. So it is not in love with itself as a methodology or as a gesture. It doesn't take itself very seriously, because of course it stems from this definition of what is a we or what is us. You know, what is a us or what is a we? It is, and this is from Reza Negrestani. It is the theater of a commitment. Yeah. What does this mean? It means that a commitment is that Reza Negrestani has an amazing definition of what is a commitment. It's this idea that a commitment. I will wait. Hold on. I will read it for you from the text. Yeah. A commitment means that while we are committing ourselves to something, we are also committing to a what else, to an unexpected, requiring new modes of action and understanding. So I will come back from the top. So the idea is that what is this we, or what is this us that we're trying to save, or to give it the good life? Yeah. This we is a theater of commitment. So it's nothing else than that. It's not actual people in a room. It is just the theater of a commitment. Yeah. So the most important thing is the fact that there is a commitment. From there stems the collectivity, from the idea of commitment. There is no collectivity without first the commitment. And the commitment means not to commit to something. So it is not ideologically driven in that sense. It is to prepare yourself to say that every time you're going to commit, you're going to commit also to the fact that something else is going to happen. So commitment, therefore, is not dedication. It is not salvation or purification, right? It is preparation to understanding that there are going to be new modes of actions and new modes of understanding. And those modes of action and of understanding, they don't come from the ideology or from the utopia. It is not there's a city to save and therefore you're going to have to find ways to save it. It's just to say, like Aristotle would say, action precedes potential, meaning that it is not that, maybe I'll explain this. So this comes actually from another philosopher called Georges Canguilhem, but you can think of Aristotle, it's more or less the same thing for the purpose of this matter. Well, not exactly, but it doesn't matter where it comes from. The idea is this, is that if action precedes potential, the classical way of thinking is this, is that there's a potential, like a reservoir of potentiality, of possible outcomes, let's say, and then we choose one as the perfect action, yeah, and then that action generates more potential or a situation from which we can produce more actions. So that, I think, mostly in performance is something that's classically misunderstood, that like we choose from a packet of potential actions and then we choose the right actions. Yes, that in choreography it's a very classical way of thinking. Whereas the other way of looking at it, which is this Canguilhem way of thinking, is to think that actually every action generates a potential, but what comes first is the idea of an action. So first we do something, and after we have done it, then we realize that we have created potential. But what is this potential? It's not the same as in the classical model where the potential is a reservoir of actions. This other potential that we have here is just the knowledge that some worlds are possible and only exist as possibilities only. So it is not about an accumulation of objects in a reservoir. It is not capitalized, like every action just doesn't generalize a capital of actions that we can use later. But this idea of potential is more one that is just the possibility, the worlds that are possible and only exist as possibilities. So their way of existing is only in the possible, yeah, not as something that are effective in this world here. I hope this is clear. And if it's not, I completely understand. It's one of the aporias of philosophy, or one of the unfinished source of philosophy, and it's suspended in time purposefully. It has to be suspended in order to be understood. Which brings me to the back to my little utopia. So who is my little betrayer? Sorry. So who is the betrayer letting in? So basically, she's letting in time as the operations of transformation, or to say differently, she's letting in the monsters. So now we have to talk a little bit about the difference between monster and chimera. So I have to check the time. Wow, it's going so fast. I have so much things to share with you. This is not even the beginning. Okay, let's do that. Okay. Let's forget about all this. I'll start somewhere else. Okay, so you get this idea. Let's start somewhere else now. So, a classical critique of utopia. Within this classical critique of utopia, there's one argument that is the limits of imagination. This comes to us from the empiricist philosophy that says that the limits of our imagination is the limit of our senses. Okay, so what is the limit of our imagination? The reason why, for an empiricist, we cannot create true monsters, or we cannot see what is radically different from us, is limited by what we are as bodies, meaning that the maximum we can go for is a chimera. What is a chimera? It is the assemblage, the recollection of known elements put together in a strange way, right? So a classical chimera has, like, I don't know, the beak of an eagle, the tail of a fox, the wings of a bird, and the eyes of a whatever, and so that is the maximum we can go. It's just this strange collage of stuff. Whereas the other claim, meaning that the monster is not possible. What we cannot imagine, what we cannot perceive or potentially perceive, we then cannot imagine at all. Of course, this is a ridiculous claim that we have exploded completely, but what it means is this, and this is why it has to do a little bit with this idea of the potential, is that what is then a monster? If it is not a chimera, what is it then? Well, it is, of course, something that lives in the shadows, meaning that we cannot actually fully see it, right? It has to escape our senses. And the best monsters, like in cinema, for instance, we know that in cinema, the best monsters are the ones you don't see, yeah? A monster is something that hides under your bed, yeah? That makes noise, that haunts you, but that you cannot touch, yeah? It signals that there's a presence here that moves the room or that moves you, yeah? You can be haunted by monsters, but you never see it. The second you see it, it becomes a chimera. The second you see Alien, in a movie, then it's just an effect. Whereas a monster in what we call littérature fantastique in French, but it's very hard to translate. And there's not really a genre in the at least in English literature. Is this literature where you would read a book and you don't know at the end of the book if it was real or if there were elements of fantasy or if there were no elements of fantasy. So the monster is what is it really? It is, of course, something that is always hidden, that manifests itself through other objects. But what it means for us really is that it is the idea of articulation, meaning that the monster is at the end of a series of articulations, yeah, of a thought process. And the second you drop the thought process, the monster disappears. So, for instance, some concepts in mathematics or in philosophy or in or some effects that result from the manipulation of time in choreography or in poetry only exist as long as you maintain the process. And then the second you drop the process, the object, what would be at the horizon of that process, disappears with it, right? So every time you want to think again about that concept or think again about a specific way to bend time through movement, you actually have to do it in order to reach it. And the second you stop doing it, it disappears. That is what I think by potential there, right? So it is those worlds that are possible, but they're only accessible if we maintain the process, right? And we have to also, and if we have to maintain the process, it also means that at some point you have to leave. You cannot stay there. If you were able to stay there, then it wouldn't be a process anymore, right? So there would be no time, basically. There's no capacity for transformation. And the price for the capacity of transformation is, of course, the acknowledgement that there is holes, yeah? That is not a whole, it's a holy discourse in the sense that it is filled with holes, it's filled with gaps, it's going to fail, it's going to be forgotten, it's going to be erased, it's going to be rewritten. It's going to be a what else of what it is. So there needs to be this capacity to fail. So that is the kind of utopia I'm thinking about when I think about utopia that is steeped in time. Yeah, that is the work of the betrayer and her apparatus of capture. Yeah. So I hope this makes some sort of sense for you. And if it doesn't, it doesn't really matter. It's just about waking up your imagination, no more, no less than that. So the other thing also I want to say about this is that the good betrayer, the one that lets the monsters in, is of course escapes the text. So they're, as I said before, I mentioned this, that they're not written about, and they're not interested in being written about. Okay, it's also a very, it's a way to say no. It's a very kind and gentle way to say no to things. To refuse without having to give an explanation in a way. I can't exactly explain this right now, but just so you know this, one way to think about it. So I was mentioning this idea of the thought process, or what happens for instance, in time-based arts, or in the thought process that comes in mathematics or in philosophy. but it is also a certain practice of poetry as a gesture of hospitality, in order to heal or to understand, for instance, the complexity of a political or emotional landscape that you are in. So it's a very practical understanding of utopia. So what is a poem in that sense? So a poem or a dance or a text about a mathematical object is a place that hosts you for a minute. So in a way, it is a utopic space, in fact, that it is a radical gesture of hospitality, saying, you who are not supposed to be here, the foreigner, the stranger, the unwelcomed, within the laws of radical hospitality, you can sit in this room. It doesn't matter if you even speak my language, and you are not expected to be here, and yet you are. I will give you a concrete example of this. So, for instance, let's say that you are reading, I don't know, you just went through a heartbreak, okay? And in order to soothe your heart, you are going to read a poem to yourself, and you'll feel a bit, maybe better, or you will understand that the pain you are feeling is pain that is part of the world. So it's a good kind of pain, right? And so the poem you are reading, for instance, could be written, it doesn't need to be for you, meaning that it can be a poem that has nothing to do with love, that is not even a romantic poem. It can be written in a language that you don't understand and then translated in language that you understand. Like, I know, it can have been written thousands of years ago in a completely different cultural and environmental context than yours. And yet you are still welcome into that house. That's how some poems survive. They survive not because they also survive because of a masculinist culture, but they also survive because they are good houses. They are places where we can be and we can transform within those houses. Their capacity to host transformation is immense. Yeah, that is why we don't really care about who wrote those poems or why they wrote them. Yeah, it is their syntax that holds the laws of hospitality. And in that sense, just like the betrayer, we also have to remember that there is no privileged house. Every material, every wood, we can make fire out of any wood. So it doesn't really matter. Yeah, we could lose all the poems that we have today. We would still know how to build those houses, those very solid houses, yeah, or very light houses in that sense, because they can travel through time. So that's what I'm thinking about when I'm thinking about utopia that is steeped in time. Yeah, it's a very practical understanding of utopia. It's also a very realistic one, meaning that it has nothing to do with the Western understanding of the future or of time as a linear practice, where the future is always, it's coming. We're waiting for it, just like in the poem of Rasha Omran. I'm just waiting for that moment. There's no such a thing in this understanding of utopia. This is a absolutely non-Western understanding of utopia as a very practical, like a pharmacon. It's a pharmacy for you to heal and transform. Yeah, so this space is very accessible. It's not at all for later. You just walk into a theater and you're in a utopian space, one that understands time, for instance, or you read a poem and immediately you are in a utopian space. You cook with friends, that is the utopia. You understand your own sexuality through a conversation with people you didn't know, that is the utopia. They're there. They're just that they are shredded and fragmented, and the idea would be that they need to be reassembled and treasured and put in a box that then is locked, and then you have the key. No, that is very boring understanding of what is utopia. It's like a Silicon Valley understanding of utopia. The next phone, who cares about these things? Anyway, or I don't care about these things. So yeah, it's a shredded utopia in that sense. This is the most. If the internet would crash now, that would be enough. I would have said enough for now. But of course, there's more. Sorry.
Do you need a drink?
No, yeah, I have some orange juice here. It's a bit too early for a drink. Of course, we can go through not the origins of utopia, because this is completely ridiculous. The origins of anything is just a ridiculous question. But of course, we can see that I can give you some, or share with you some elements, or remind you of some elements that you know about, like the conditions of production of a Western utopia. So this idea of the gated community. But I don't know how relevant it is now. I can give you an example just so that we have it in mind without having to develop too much. Of course, we have to remember that my definitions of utopia are just little parodies of utopia. Yeah. But one that I like a lot, that I can share with you, comes from Phaedra. So this book that is attributed to Plato, or this discourse that is attributed to Plato. So Phaedra is a book about the reality of discourse, which is very interesting when you're thinking about utopia, but that's not the point. The point is, at the beginning of the discourse of Phaedra, Socrates is hanging out in the city of Athens, so inside the closed gates of the city of Athens, like the ideal polis where we will, make humans, mostly men, better. And a friend of his walks past him and says, Socrates, great that you're here. Just came from the house of a common friend of ours, and he told me this. I heard this amazing speech, and I really want to talk with you about it. It will change. We have to talk about these things. And Socrates says, okay, yes, let's do it, but let's not do it here. Let's not do it in the city of Athens. Let's leave for a calmer and quieter place. And so they leave Athens. They are holding hands in my mind. And then they go down the city of Athens to a river that is now part of Athens called the Ilissos River. It's a very quiet place down the hill. And there's a tree there, very beautiful tree. And so they sit under the tree in this like idyllic, quiet place. And then they start talking. This is where the discourse starts of Phaedra. And this, for me, is the quintessential problem of the West, in the sense of quintessential, I don't know, but it is this is exactly where utopia, the horrible things of utopia start, and also a necessity that is very hard to escape. This idea that in order to be able to think, in order to be able to access those monsters, the process is very fragile. Those objects that we're looking for, those utopian spaces that are steeped in time, in order to access them, we need to, in a way, be interrupted, but also not interrupted. We need to be in a way, or in the mind of this Western way of thinking. It is about not being interrupted, because it's a privileged place that we need to be in. So we need to leave the rest of the humans. We need to leave the place of the boule, the place of opinion, the place that is constantly transforming. That has a lot of necessities, and we need to go to a quieter place, isolate ourselves in order to reach perfection, in order to create this utopia without the others, right? And so that is the beginning for me of utopia. Of course, it's not, but that is for me where it starts. It's in this problem there. I don't need to draw any conclusions on that. I just want you to remind you of that tricky part, of course. Do you need to build a utopian place before you invite people in? Things like that. I don't need to finish any of that. And of course, in that understanding of utopia, it's of course, it's as we know, it's a very violent distribution of time and space, or a very violent distribution of space through hierarchy. There's a lot of, in a utopian space, there's a lot of statues of the founders. It's very typical. So like the founder of the city has a statue. This idea that it's obsessed with lineage. It has it understands history like children understand history. So it's very, very. There's no paying attention to the unheard, or making alliances with what is not here. It's this obsession with transparency, like with a common trait. There's a lot of lists also in utopian writings, a lot of lists, but what we can do, cannot do, behavior, etc. it's a complete ignorance of what is hauntology, of like being haunted, like, or the idea of like, as if there was no such a thing as the subconscious. Every utopia has no understanding of what is a political subconscious. They have no understanding of it whatsoever. It's this idea, like Yulia Kristeva would say, like the horror for utopia is a polyphonic intimacy. Monsters. Yulia Kristeva says that monsters live across between languages and spirits, and compose utopia. Compose a utopia that is made of polyphonic intimacy. So that is her. That's the nightmare of this Greek, or what I call now the Western utopia. Let's call it Greek utopia. I'm just looking at time. Oh, I guess so little time. I haven't even talked to you about slime utopia. This is a catastrophe. Okay, so I could conclude on this here. I mean, there's no way to conclude, so there's no pressure really there for me, at least. Okay, so the idea behind, so as you can see, betraying utopia is a technique, right? In order for me to talk about things. What it is also is to not dismiss that this utopian practice, this process of utopia that I'm talking about when I'm talking about a poem, is also a necessity. It's a political necessity, because a poem is a house in order for us to live in times of hardship, or a way to recall to us that there is a good life. It could be said very lightly, but for some of us and for maybe all of us in different periods of our lives, these are necessary spaces. This is not a joke. This is not just a luxury. For instance, I will say this. Maybe, I don't know if you know this, but like, there's a very famous poem by Mahmoud Darwish, a Palestinian poet, called "The Land of My Poem is Green," and where basically he has theorized that the entirety of the Palestinian people can be living inside his poem, and that for him, once you have this poem, you actually have the land and the territory. And so, of course, these are the claims of a poet. You don't have to follow them, but it actually has a political function within the Palestinian people. This poem, it has become actually a house. And you can think of so many examples of, I mean, I'm sure you all know of something that is like this. This is like an actual necessity. And it's a bit difference between, understanding art as a possible way to transform reality, or a necessary way to transform reality. And so if you believe in utopia in that sense, then you're on the side of that it is a necessary way to transform reality. That without those fragments or this shredded utopia, there is no way out. Another person that thinks like this, that we cannot survive without. Another person that thought like this is, of course, Sun Ra from the Afrofuturist, who in a way created the Afrofuturist movement that says, I am not real, I am just like you. And he was talking about the horrors of racism against Black people in the United States, and saying there is a way that we can be, it is as myth. That we can live and survive in a shredded environment that is the practice of the mythification of ourselves. So it is in a way mythopoetic because it is projective and tendentious. And it is metamorphic in the sense that it acknowledges that there's a pressure between language and body, a pressure between reality and language, a pressure between the idea, the representation of a body and the lived body. So it is metamorphic and mythopoetic in that sense. And it is also an oral practice, not because it is only talked about, but because it understands that the articulation needs to be practiced in order to exist. So those three elements are basically what would compose a utopia steeped in time. That's the result of the work of the betrayer. Yeah. So this kind of utopia that is not slimy yet, that is the work of the betrayer, and her accomplishment is not an aesthetical gesture, like Jameson would say, like utopia as an aesthetical gesture, but a political necessity. If people think of Afrofuturism as an ornamentation or a superficial way to talk about a specific kind of pain that lives in this world, you're mistaken, in my opinion. It is a necessary way. It is a way. It's not a way out. It's another way in that is fantastic. And it's the same with many different literary genres, many different political movements that have voluntarily chosen fragmented, shredded practices of imagination in order to talk about either themselves or historical moments. For instance, Saidiya Hartman, who lives in the United States, she teaches in Columbia, I think, University. Saidiya Hartman has invented this idea of critical fabulation, which is a way to fill the gaps between the archives of the life of someone who would be taken as a slave into the United States. And in order to actually write that history, she says, there is no other way than to use narration, than to use fiction. And that fiction is part of how we write history. So it's a historiographic gesture to do that. It is a political gesture, but also mostly a historiographic gesture. It is to refuse the fact that exact or precise history, in order to be precise, it needs to be betraying the concept of linear time. It needs to betray concepts that have nothing to do with rigorous historiography. So in a way, Saidiya Hartman's work, or the work of, for instance, poetry that describes landscapes in the past, or that transmit gestures in order to survive, they are entirely part of how we should write history rigorously. Yeah. So that is also one of the side effects, in a way, of our commitment to shredded utopia. Is proper historiography, correct rigorous historiography. No, correct, not correct, of course. So it's to not confuse storytelling with a lie. Storytelling is not just a lie that you tell to children, but it is a riddle. Yeah, it is it's a formal game. It is, and if you play this game, if you sit inside it, you will discover a truth. You will practice your political organs and in a way, your utopian organs. Yeah, so it becomes like a school within itself. Yeah, that is what this technique of storytelling and of betrayal means in that sense. And sliming utopia starts a bit there. It starts in this idea that so the betrayer she says something is porous. Yeah, there is hidden writing, and there's a political lesson we can start working from there. Yeah. And sliming utopia starts with the same idea, but it is not just ways of living. It's not to say things like living is an entanglement. It is not a gated community. It's not but it is about it starts to be interested more in the monster. So it's less interested in the camouflage or the camouflage of political practices that only exist when they are camouflaged, only when they are hidden. But it starts to look at, okay, but what is this monster? What is this thing that keeps escaping, that has no purpose whatsoever? So in a way, slime utopia is much more speculative practice that is failed by language always, but does not exist outside of this process thought. So in a way, if I were to talk with you about slime utopia, it would be one very singular and specific kind of slime utopia. It actually wouldn't be even a kind, it would be one specific slime utopia. And it cannot be generalized at all. That is the nature of slime utopia, is that there is no way to generalize it. Now, there are ways to understand it, for me to approach it with you. First of all this work for me on slime utopia, just to reveal the sources, comes from the work of Reza Negrestani, that he did in Cyclonopedia, but mostly that he did in a text that is called that is on decay. That is called I can't remember now. Just one second. It's called Undercover Softness. Yeah, and this is a text about decay. So we could start in a way reading it together, and but I can explain very roughly what it is about. So the idea is this: is that Slime Utopia is not interested anymore. It understood the lesson of time. It understood the critique of utopia. It goes through that, and then it says this: okay, what is a body that is rotting? Yeah. So a body that is rotting is basically the promise of more bodies to come. Yeah. So it is this idea that I can instead of paraphrasing, I'll just read you the definition by Reza. That will be easier. It is just sorry, one second. A body that is decaying, it is the intensive exteriorization of nested interiorities. Okay, so this is what I'm interested in Slime Utopia. It's this idea of intensive exteriorization of nested interiorities, meaning that every putrefaction, every disappearance, every collapse of a system, for instance, the body as a system, every collapse of the system is not just its reappropriation by a bigger system, let's say the soil, yeah, but it is actually the creation of worlds that started as an interior. So like my lungs collapse inside my body and then they fall. So they were like this and then they fall inside the soil. But to say that actually they bubble new worlds, constantly. So this very classic idea of like that is used in philosophy since, I don't know, maybe Gilles Deleuze, this idea of like the swamp, you know, or staying in the middle of things, or this generation through putrefaction is basically the idea that Reza is talking about, but he's talking about it as something that is infinite. So he's really thinking about some mathematical models that make us go tendentially towards zero, what we call sorry, in English, asymptotic, I think is the word in English, when you know, you have a curve that is tendentially going to zero, but infinitely, so it never actually goes there. Or you would have a line and then you have a spiral around the line that tends towards the end of it, but never really goes there. So that is the concept of Slime Utopia. It's a much more, in a way, speculative practice than betraying utopia, in the sense that we really don't know where it will go, or we really don't know where it will end. I really would like to talk to you more about Slime Utopia, but I have promised that we would have time for questions, and I can see that it's 1:15. So if there are any questions, now is a good time, and then maybe I can talk more about Slime Utopia.
Are there any questions? Does somebody have a... doesn't seem like there are any questions in the chat.
Sorry, can I?
Yes, River?
Yes. Well, honestly speaking, I have been still digesting that many doors that have been slightly or wildly opened by Jassem. It's a really interesting discursive process of navigating or interrogating the notion of utopia. I got a very, I don't know, maybe primal question about, because here during the talk of Jason, there have been a lot of descriptions of body movements and also relationships, like either it's like distancing or intimacy, or in terms of proximity, like all like various kinds of actions and gestures and movements of body to imagine or to represent the notion or the territory of the umbrella or this constructed notion of utopia. So in this context, I've been thinking actually during the many turns or adjectives of movements. I was wondering uh, if the space of utopia and a certain betrayer of or certain subject or objects can react to the center space of utopia in many different ways, then how would you see the relationship between utopia and the anti-utopia if there is a spectrum
Aha.
in there?
Yes.
How would you describe it
yeah.
with
Yeah.
movements or
I mean, in a way, I apologize. That might sound a little bit cheeky, so I really apologize for that. But in a way, classical utopia or Western utopia is for me the anti-utopia. This is the place that is like dead, uninteresting, has no capacity to transform, and therefore the utopia that is proposed by a time-steeped utopia is formally not correct. It is not utopia. I just betrayed the concept and broke it, basically. Or I didn't break it, but you see what I mean. However, I think that so that would be like in this relationship of opposition. That's where I would put myself in this bit cheeky argument. But what I would like to add to this is that when it comes to slimy utopia, it's not that it's anti-utopic. It's not that it is against the idea of a fragmentary utopia as a necessary space for survival, for our capacity to transform collectively, etc., to acknowledge that we are haunted, that time is not linear when it comes to collective political practices, etc. It's not that it's against it. It's just that we don't know what its interest will be. It's a bit like the work of Munoz on queer futurity. Is this idea that we don't know what the word queer means. That is the good news. Or to say differently, like Mark Fisher very notoriously has attributed this to Frederick Jameson. I'm not sure that it is, but whatever. He had attributed to Jameson this very famous quote that says that it is easier to imagine the end of the world than to imagine the end of capitalism. Yeah, that is the limit of the empiricist understanding of imagination. Therefore, that if you want to go further, then you have to create monsters. And those monsters are, in a way, political programs or political models that you will not recognize, that you don't have the organs for. You don't have to talk like an empiricist or to talk like a Deleuzian. Sorry about that. It would be to think like, I don't have the lungs in order to breathe the air of this new political landscape that you're proposing to me. I need to generate those organs in order to access it. So in a way, the slime utopia is not anti-utopian, but it is dystopian in the way that this is about diversion. Yeah, it's about taking another path. And so Mark Fisher used to say this, that it's idea that capitalism corrodes our capacity to imagine. It is a corrosion of the mind. Yeah, because it doesn't allow us to go to an actually new place that is, in a way, because the new place then is associated immediately with scary or with monster. But a monster is just another word for friendship. It's just another word for the radical laws of hospitality. It's not Lovecraftian, in the Lovecraftian words, like it is horrifying, but there's nothing horrifying about the absolute otherness. It is a political practice, So this whole idea also of association between horror and philosophy is just a pedagogical trick. It's an aesthetical gesture, but we have to be careful to remember that it is only an aesthetical gesture. That what we're looking for is not death as in our own death as humans, but death as in a capacity to transform further. It is a concept and a process, not an object. you know. So that's why I love the word monster, because there's this idea of friendly monster, and it's a nice, in a way, oxymoron. So you can play a lot on that, and also because in literature and in cinema and in performance, we use this idea of like shadowing, foreshadowing, camouflage, being haunted by, hiding, reappearing, time-bending techniques, basically, very well. So the idea of monster is very appealing very quickly, I think, for people who work with time, or who are in time-based art. Everybody works in time. But you see what I mean. But we cannot confuse this with the political program. We cannot fall into the aesthetical gesture just as an aesthetical gesture. That is the trick. It's very important, because, and this is where I think slime utopia starts to happen. That it's about this idea that it is everything that is in between. You know, slime utopia is shredded utopia, but in a much more dynamic way. It is to say that, in a way, the future, yeah, or the absolute radical otherness. So the fragmentary or shredded utopia, in a way, is also a place that we recognize. We want to be there. Yeah, we know it's new, but in a way, we have imagined it together collectively. So we can sit in this poem, or we can sit in this amazing collective space that we all wished for. In a way, it's like wish fulfillment imagination. Whereas slime utopia is like, you don't even have the organs to wish it, but it is still here. It is not bringing back linear temporality, where slime utopia is in a future that is very distant. That would be, for instance, my critique of Minos, is to think of like as if queer was something that belonged again to the future that we have to wait for. You know, no. Radical utopia or radical political models, they already exist. It's just that they are hidden. Yeah, their capacity is to be hidden. There's no such a thing as the future in that sense. It's just about a different kind of playfulness of time, like, you know, play as in the fact that things don't fit together very well. So there's game. You know, in French we say there's game. There's a playfulness, means that it doesn't fit very well. That is where this slime utopia is hiding. Yeah. And we just have to look for it. I mean, we have done this with many models before. Some have failed more or less, but just to give you an example of that, for instance, it would be the idea of, it's to not confuse the concept of the witch with the historical figure of the witch. So this idea that, like, the witch is not, sorry, let me say this differently, erase what I just said. Is to think about the witch not as a character, yeah, or as even something that is human in that sense, but as an operation, as a political operation that is made by what? By historiography, not by humans, not by people, not by political programs. There's no such a thing as a witch. There's only the political operation that we call witch, yeah. Or there's no such, like, and in under this political operation of the witch, you can put many things. You can put experimental medicine, the declaration that nothing is impure, that we can access our own stomachs. It can be of a different understanding of what is the periphery of theft, hiding. There's so many things that we're not going to talk about this now, because it'll be a completely different subject, which I would like to talk about, but it's a very different subject. But you see, that is where slime is acquainted with. It's this idea that, but if we have discovered that we can say the sentence, the witch is an operation, not a person, that is a first step towards this idea of slime utopia, meaning that it is just there in the soul. We just need to, in a way, find the organs to be able to look for it, not imagine those organs or create, but just find them. Yeah, and the only way to find them is to have this practice or this thought process, in my opinion. But maybe there are other ways to do it. So that's what I think by slime, like, and it has nothing to do with the future. Yeah, the future is for children. It's for Silicon Valley. It has nothing to do with us. Yeah. Anyway, the future is never for you. I don't know if you noticed. It's never for you. The future. You know, this horrible sentence. The future belongs to ... You know, people who wake up early or whatever. This is the scariest sentence I've ever heard in my life. Like, it's the beginning of authoritarian ideology. You know? We're never good enough anyway for that future, regardless of who decides of what the future is. You know? Just want to mention that. I know I answered your question by adding more stuff, but yeah, that's the game.
Messy.
I feel I feel that the lecture itself is this sort of trap that doesn't trap me, but rather gives holes. And what you said before about not producing a way out, but another way in, I don't know. There was something also the way that you're talking, just in the way that you're conveying ideas. There's something about this kind of like, it's like a fish trap, how you can kind of like you float in, and then if you sort of whirl around and go back out, but if you go around, you get sort of like inside the trap. And I love this this mode with time of like, okay, well, I'm explaining this, but I'm going to come back to that, but you don't need to know this now, but you'll need to know it later. But I want to say this, but I'm not going to say it. But at the same time, I'll explain this. It's like creating somehow you were shredding it at the same time as making these kind of offers. And I mean, there was so much in there that I both want more and want reflection, which is great because it's being recorded, because every time I was thinking, oh yes, like I want to come back to this, but then I don't know, it feels like this moment that you describe, well, to me at least, like the last hour and a half has been very inspiring in the fact that I don't necessarily know more, but there's something that has been like, well, of course I also know more, but it's more that like things have sort of sparked, or there's like new connections or new ways to think and to imagine have been opened in some way, and I don't know, I feel like this has been like a momentary utopia, like a time to sit in. So thank you so much for that. And yeah, I don't have any questions, but I like wrote down a lot of things, but I don't even know how to go back to them because they're sort of, I mean, it's funny that we were speaking before we started about like the spatiality of writing directly onto paper and how that allows you to be messy and non-linear. That's what I feel has happened here. And I guess I wonder if there's other questions from other people that are actually questions rather than what I just did, which was just talk. And if there's not, then it's already, well, I mean, here it's 11:30. I think it's like the time to finish, but also kind of, I don't really care. Like, I'm happy to hear more. Yeah, I wonder if there's anything else you want to say.
I can say this. Thank you very much. It's very nice to hear that. It's also nice to confirm that I'm not completely crazy. I mean, a little bit, but not too much.
The right amount, I'd say.
Yeah, the right amount. I mean, the idea, I think, with giving this lecture, the reason why, I mean, I don't know if it's a lecture, but whatever. The thing is also for me to do it often is because it's less a lesson and more about reminding all of us of some fragments of a process of thinking. And in a way, it's like, I mean, I'm the one talking, but we're all thinking at the same time, right? So there's this idea. I really appreciate this way of doing things. That it's not about teaching anything; it's just reminding people of ways of thinking, more or less, that we all know about. I wish I had spoken more about Slime Utopia because it is the most speculative aspect of it. It's also the one that uses the most heavier conceptual apparel in a way, but also has to fail. It has to be failed by language. It has to. There's no way around it. So in a way, it is normal that I don't talk about it, but it's also, I could say more. I could prepare us more to fall into it. but there is yeah, I mean, it's a regressive movements that are, yeah, I don't know. I mean, I'm not going to start now because then it would take too much time. But so that would be something I would really would have liked to share more. But I also know that not sharing it is, I'm not trying to find a way out, but it is also completely part of it. There are moments where there are places where I have given that lecture, and when it came to Slime Utopia, I basically said nothing. I just read a poem or showed a picture of someone that worked with Slime Utopia, in my opinion, and that was enough. So here I don't have any examples, but yeah. I think there was a question. I just saw something pop up. So
there was a question. May I clarify the term you use to describe the radical type of utopia?
I don't really have a. Is it this idea of betraying utopia? I mean, for me, there's no more or less radical way. I mean, in a way, I think of the Western understanding of utopia, the Moorian way of understanding utopia as in a way radical, because it's a radical ideology, and it erases a lot of things. Betraying utopia for me is in a way less radical, and it's more about a practice of I don't know how to explain it. Half concept, half affect. In a way, it's like introducing the monster. So I don't know how much more radical it is. I just think of it as more practical, as something that stops thinking of the moment where we have to delay the moment where we are going to have the good life, and think that this is the life, and realism is about acknowledging, finding ways to acknowledge that. Not to acknowledge it, that would be too easy in a way, but that we have ways to acknowledge what is this utopian life that comes to us only in shreds, only in fragments, only discretely. It's its condition of existence, in a way, if I can speak like this, is to be discrete, as in discontinuous, but also discrete as in hidden under. But it's not because it's hidden under that it doesn't exist. And that we cannot access it immediately right now. We do. The only thing is that our capacity to tell stories, our capacity to acknowledge it with each other, our capacity to acknowledge that the only way to access a fragmented or shredded utopia is collectively. There's no utopia of one. That is the Western utopia. That is only the utopia of one. But this practical utopia, this shredded utopia, is the one that we need to acknowledge in a collective, in a commitment, in an us. Yeah, that's why I was talking about this us as a theater of commitment. This idea that, and then we are ready. And the political program, in a way, of this kind of shredded utopia is the political program of this definition of commitment that comes from Reza Negarestani, which is to say that is the utopia. What it does is that it prepares us for a what else, for an unexpected that will come. Every commitment is the commitment to what we commit to, and it's the preparation for us to commit to what else. Not what will come next, but what we have missed, what is unexpected, unwelcomed, unaccounted for. Not to make it, not to give it justice. It's not about, finally it's acknowledged. It's just that, now we're there. And so it has to be necessarily a collective endeavor. It cannot live outside of it, I think. That's why also it's shredded in a sense. I mean, if you walk into a theater and there's this fleeting moment of, let's say magic, where everybody in the room know that they are in the room together. It doesn't last very long, and it's usually an illusion because, of course, not everybody is. It is there, but it has to be collective. That would be a metaphor for it. That's not what I'm talking about. It's a metaphor. So I hope this somehow answers the question without answering it.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's all part of the kind of trickster sort of trapper, is to answer without answering, or to answer without answering, but still sort of lead it to somewhere, open something up, make a hole. I feel like I mean, it's a strange thing to say, but I have the sensation that I know something more about myself, but I'm not sure what after experiencing this last hour and a half. But maybe the definition of what that could be will come later, which I also am very open to.
What kind of sensation?
I don't know, just that I feel like there was many moments where the kind of the way that you articulated things, Jassem, made me sort of confirmed something for me, or made me go like, aha, yeah, that's I understand something about that without necessarily understanding it entirely. And for me, this is like a extremely pleasurable sensation, in that it's also what I hope that most art will do to me, in that I will understand it on some sort of in some sort of way that I also don't understand in this way where I have to also it also produces a kind of like a reaching or like a change within me that kind of it feels like it's if it's already there, but I need to like grow around it or something for it to. I don't know that there's a process somehow, but that yeah, which I guess is similar to this kind of image of the lungs collapsing.
Yeah.
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 I mean, like I have like lots of questions, but I also just have thoughts, which are types of questions, I suppose.
But we can finish here. I just want to say this. This is part of a program that is the program that was started by Frantz Fanon a long time ago. That is about it's in 4 points. I won't go too much into it, but one of the points is the difficulty to inscribe the living in duration. So this question of how historiography or the way to write the living in duration is a political program in itself. So that this question around utopia for me is part of this bigger political program that for me started with Frantz Fanon a long time ago. So just to give another reference to the work, and of course it is in participation to what Saidiya Hartman is doing with this idea of critical fabulation, which I'm not sure what she's doing right now, so I can't speak for her at all. Just to, I hope it gives tools for people who are in time-based art to, think about their own work. Basically, this is what it is for, really, nothing more than that. Whether it's poetry or choreography or storytelling or, doesn't matter what it is. And one thing I want to say is that I cannot do it if I cannot speak. So it is very necessary for me to give this lecture. It's not just like a way of earning money. It's actually a way I need this in order to think. So I'm very thankful that I was given the opportunity to do that. I really mean it. So thank you very much for inviting me. It's
thank you, Jassem.
It's very important for me in my work to do that. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, thank you so much. And yeah, I've been thinking a lot about like also these kind of oral tradition and the fact that that things need to be practiced to exist, and to exist through time, or to persist through time, in ways that require also kind of course, being together and like doing things together, collectively, but also my brain is like it's almost midnight. But also that that they also need to be compelling, to be there's something about things that exist through a kind of embodied transmission or an oral tradition that need to be practiced to be able to exist and to persist through time, but they also need to have this compelling, that there's something about them that needs to be required to be practiced, required to be passed on, and something about what are those things that are compelling, that kind of allow us to be passed on. I mean, similar to the the poems that are the house that that you can instantly recognize as like, this can hold us and we can hold it and it can hold us. And so I think as much as you're thankful for the opportunity to practice, so like to be in this practice, speaking it, for things to exist and for thinking to happen, I think that it's there's a lot in here, in these ideas, and the kind of also the history of these ideas that have a very compelling nature to them, that feel very necessary to continue to talk about in a way where, I don't know, there's something so fundamental about many of these things as sort of tools and things, but that also the main tool is to do somehow, and so thank you, and thank everybody for being here so that it can happen. That's how things happen.
Yes, I agree completely. I mean, storytelling is also my. I mean, I that's how I live. So, but it doesn't need to be a discursive practice at all. Not important. Can be through anything else than just talking. All right. So
it's difficult to end, isn't it? Yeah. Starting and finishing are difficult activities. But yeah, I think I guess what more can I say other than like, thank you. I'm very grateful, and thanks also to River and Adam for the invitation to me to invite people to share things. It's very nice.
Thank you so much, Jassem. Thank you so much for the beautiful kick-off session today.
Yeah, I think it was perfect as the first session, because there's so much in there that I think feels, at least, like it ripples through the other things, and it feels like the type of thoughts and activity that does do this loop back on towards itself,
right,
because it isn't this sort of linear all the way through. So that feels like quite great as the first.
Yeah,
because it won't stay the first. It will continue to come in back.
Right. I do have a kind of like visual, I don't know how to describe it, like kind of like visual representation during the talks. I have been like, there's been a tendency of categorizing and like allocating, accommodating, while at the same time hosting, in terms of hospitality, like many different thoughts and perspectives in a certain universe. And at the same time, I do also feel like this is like super, for me, rare to hear, because I think this kind of like approach and the entire analysis or reflection onto the notion of a utopia and its expanded context has been like, yeah, very rich. At the same time, it wouldn't be that much rich in terms of the if we put things in a binary system. However, it's at the same time rich because it's been a little bit, to me at least, very clear and in an ongoing process of floating, navigating, and at the same time, it is what it is, or what it could be at the same time, like mixing the temporality, is also part of this navigational process of getting understanding. Yeah.
I have to say, I also just love this moment when at the end where you're like, and by the way, the future is for children, because like it literally is for children because they'll grow up and but it's also like such a great statement of like, well, ridiculous to and I don't know.
Yeah, I know.
It just came to my
for you. Oh my god.
it just came to my mind that like, oh yeah, so great, this statement, the future is for children, like, because the concept of the future is for children, in that like, we can't speak about the future like this, or like the future is this kind of like redundant concept somehow, but also that literally the future is for children. That was a great moment for me.
Sorry. I say things like this sometimes. I'm sorry.
No, I think it was wonderful because it's it was such a double meaning that came across like so instantly to me that I was like, wow, I just this is a fantastic moment. I and also I had this like moment of regret because I was asked to write I don't know, what was it? It was like an end of financial year campaign, which I was very happy to be a part of for an organization, and they were asking artists to tell what the future would be, because artists can like making the future or something like this, and I just like was like, I struggled writing a couple of sentences about that, and I think in the end I just wrote something like in the future we'll be like in the future we'll be able to look back or something like, which is like also an important thing to be able to do. But I wish I had said the future is for children in this double way.
Yeah, it's a bit cruel, but it's also true.
It's true. It's true in so many ways. Yeah, and I love the kind of.
I mean, this project.
I love the lethal parody of that sentence is perfect.
Yeah, it's I mean, it's part of the work on Utopia. It's also part of this work that I do called Arab Futurism, which is a critique. I started it as a critique of curators that kept asking artists to talk about the future. Mm-hmm. And I wanted to explain to myself, but try to dismiss entirely this idea of future as a irrelevant category. But yeah, whatever. So it was just a little joke. And then I started to look at what futurism looks like, and it was really a horror show, especially when it came to the way it was written about, specifically by curators in big visual art institutions. So I had a lot of fun deconstructing that notion of future in their work. There were also a lot of people who didn't understand, who did even like contresens, like the complete misunderstanding of what the artists were talking about. For instance, there's this thing called Gulf Futurism by Monira Al-Qadiri and other people. and it's basically a critique of petropolitics in the Gulf. But people thought of it as something that they aspired to. Like, no. Gulf futurism is a critique of the idea of future in the Gulf. It is not wanting that future for them. So there's a lot of that where people think of the aestheticization of horror, basically, is something that people, then it becomes something that people desire, and like, so I don't know, this whole thing on like the aestheticization of political gesture is also something I think is very beautiful and very, very dangerous, something to think about. I mean, it's a bit tricky to talk about this with artists, of course, but that's how it is.
Yeah, no, I think it's tricky, and I think it's Boris Groys writes also on kind of like the dangers of art becoming activism, or maybe the other way around, because the political gesture becomes aestheticized, and then I'm trying to recall this off the top of my head, but that when an action becomes an aesthetic, then does the action become then weakened? Or, I mean, there's lots to pull apart about that, but I understand this kind of like dangerous line, this dangerous territory of like going too far into there and sort of weakening the thing that you're aiming to make stronger.
I mean, it's also just an understanding also that there are different practices of art that are not in institutions, that are not in a way privileged in the sense of like specified or professionalized spaces, and that are this practice of utopia, very much so. For instance, I don't know, in Iran, people say poems in the bus. In X country, people do storytelling as a way to convey the news, or singing as a way to measure the distance between two villages, or etc., etc. And these are not particularities of a time-based art practice. They are time-based art practice. They're not a version of, they are the thing. They're not the original or the most important, they are the most shared practice. And that is something also to acknowledge it as, that is a political practice. It is not to talk about other politics, it is the political practice. The capacity to tell stories in order to understand new political models is that is, for instance, what storytelling is also about, is the political practice. That's it, is to say it is important to understand the world as a place that you forget and remember. For instance, it's important to understand the world as a place that is haunted by the ones who are not there, that signal you that you are moved by them, for instance. So it's another way to understand, for instance, political subconscious without reading a book about, what is a political subconscious. Just there's a political practice of it that we call time-based art, or storytelling, or poetry reading, or performance in the woods, or whatever you want to call it, that is very much spread, and it's very much alive and available, readily available. I think so, and it doesn't need to come after the political want or need or necessity. It is. I mean, that's what Afrofuturism, in my opinion, is. It is the political. It is its own political program. It is not to participate to another political program. It's a very serious one.
I think the key is somehow, I mean, I don't know what that word is in terms of its like in terms of whether it's a noun or an adjective, but that replacing as with is makes something the thing. Like art is insert whatever, rather than art as something. Like it's like it's so different when something is as something rather than it is something. And
that is the politics of commitment. I mean, this is the politics of commitment that also Milner, the book I was reading, telling about earlier, this is what he says. He says for a Greek, the idea is not to describe what the city is to affirm what it is by talking about it. And what is nature? Physis crutestae philen. Nature likes to hide, for instance. It is not to observe that nature likes to hide. It is a way to describe nature. It's a way to affirm the nature of nature as something that is constantly disappearing or constantly hiding. I mean, we could talk about this forever. And so he thinks about, when he talks about friendship, he doesn't talk about friendship as something that sees two things that are affirmations that are radically different from each other and that are capable of being hosted in the same place. Not as like the infinite friendship of the world and everybody together, but more like the fact that we don't need to observe that the mode of affirmation is in a way has its own laws of hospitality into it. It is not a mode of exclusion at all. But of course, if we start to extrapolate these notions to general politics, it becomes actually just a very racist model. So that's why it's also important to see where where are we speaking and what are we talking with? Are we talking with concepts? Then we can only resonate so far. Right? So it's also, I mean, otherwise there's a lot of misunderstanding. That's why also this idea of slime utopia can be very tricky, because you can end up with people like Lovecraft, who are like notorious idiots, basically, that have no understanding of what a real difference felt like in a political field, So we don't have to we can pick and choose, It's important to be able to do that. In my opinion, of course, it's just my opinion on the subject.
Okay, well, we sort of said the end, and then we said more, and then I don't know, people sort of seem to stay for that last hang on for the after bit. The end is not at the end. Somehow it was in the beginning, and then we kept talking. But that's also wonderful. Bad at wrapping things up. River, will you help me wrap this up?
Yes,
because I could go on. I could just keep going forever.
I know, and also I guess we have been in the flow of endless discussion, haven't we? I mean, yes. There have been so many interesting points that we have been, or Jason has been touch onto it, and for the I wouldn't say conclusion, because this word is kind of forbidden at the beginning. Okay, so maybe I could propose a question a little bit in the context, at the same time not to conclude kind of like this section. So maybe to Angela and to Jason, I would like to propose a question such like, if we are choreographing or performing the notion of this utopia in this context of the talk today, how would you like to say something about how this entire universe of utopia can be related to the moment that we are living in the pandemic situation. Would you like to have something to talk about or to briefly expand the notion, and then how we can carry this um, knowledge or practice to confront the life and the society wherever we are based in, or living to this mm, situation.
Oh my
Us
God, River,
human.
it's gonna take us another 3 hours.
I know. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. But I do think it's been very interesting to navigate through Jackson's lecture, like how we are, like how we can recreate not new, but at the same time perhaps alternative understanding of everything, or like, because for example now I'm living, I'm here, um I'm here in Paris, and then Jason is in Norway, and you are in Australia, and then I think the online audiences are from also everywhere across different continents, and also reflecting to the very beginning of the contest, that why we are doing this exchanges and um, programs online is because of that, due to COVID, that we are kind of like have been falling apart, or excel or confronting many different kind of situation in terms of the distancing, and then how this perhaps at the at the end, at this event, that we can kind of like bring together some gestures or notions while confronting this COVID situation. For example, if we are going to betray um, what we are living now in our personal or collective context, how we can think further, how and what would you like to suggest?
I kind of feel like during the pandemic, I mean, we're still in the pandemic in many ways, that I felt myself living in time but not space, or somehow there was only time. So it was in some ways, like, according to how I've kind of taken in the thinking around utopia, and that it's this sort of place without outside of time, is that it was then like the opposite somehow, in that living in time but not in space, like literally not being able to move around or anything, but just kind of like witnessing time, and time sort of ongoing, or sort of stretching in strange ways, and that as soon as you separate, like space and time kind of need to go together in order to like understand many fundamental physical laws about the world, and once they're sort of unhinged from each other, it becomes this like very strange experience, and this is from a position also of being able to isolate oneself, so I don't know if there's a lesson from that, or if that's more of an observation, or that it becomes this like at once the total utopia of letting the time in, but also like the anti-utopia, because like it's only time somehow, and so it was like instead of like making some holes, it was just like to take the entire container somehow, and I don't know what the like what the lesson or the takeaway from that is, other than yeah, somehow like, I don't know, the possibility to weave through both a place and a time is kind of necessary somehow for how I understand experience, and one without the other becomes the anti-utopia. So it's about kind of like meshing them together somehow, or like weaving both place and time together. But to weave things together, of course, you need to open up the holes to like, you know, draw the weave together. Maybe I would say that's my thought on that, just off the top of my head right now.
I like that. I'm not sure how I can answer the question. I think Angela said a lot of good things here. I don't know how to say more. I wouldn't be just repeating what you said. Really,
which is part of your
yeah,
part of your tendency.
Yeah, I'm not sure what I could say about that. It'll be very very interesting.
Or somehow that I think when this confluence of like a place and a time is a moment, actually, and so one without the other seems somehow not quite right somehow. So it's these moments where those two things weave together that create a moment that is somehow in a way, Jassem, what you were saying about that utopia is this kind of thing that can only come and go, and momentary sort of thing, and yeah, that a moment is when a place and a time come together.
I completely agree with that. I think that it's at the same time impossible to not think of a world moment in a way, and at the same time saying it doesn't help. You know what I mean? In a way, it's just it's as much something that we can and need to talk about and play with collectively in order to make it a bit less traumatic in a way, or as less traumatic as we can, because it's of course a lot of pain and a lot of death and a lot of political strife and hardship, etc. So it's and at the same time, to start to address it from the point of view of this massive body that is the circulation of a virus across bacterial environments, I don't think is possible. I don't think that is how we can speak it or speak or host it as a problem. It's a very difficult question that you raised. I'm not sure how to think about it. Without repeating what Angela said, basically. Yeah. Yeah. It just I just come back to this sentence from Fred Mote and this idea of like consent to not being a single being, consent not to be a single being. I think there's playfulness in that order, because it's very imperative, of course, and so of course something you want to back up from as much as you want to go with it. And I think the playfulness there is yeah, something that we can use. The same with this idea of the pandemic and utopia, like there's playfulness, just have to be a bit prudent about it in a way. That now we have to consent that we're not a single being. that we're not individual entities in that sense. But yeah, I don't know how to say much more about that, to be honest. So I'm just gonna stop talking now.
No worries.
Sorry.
Yeah, sure. I mean, of course, like it has been like something that would be potentially be, expanded endlessly, and yeah, but really I've been really appreciate about this today's or tonight's program slash talks and conversations that Jason and Angela have been sharing with us. So yeah, that's check it out more because I mean, like, yeah, because it's also reminding me the whole or the entire context of this online program, which is entitled Time Dress Up as a Ghost Arrives at a Party Drifting. And I mean, the title itself has been providing me a lot or like so much imaginary situations or yeah, something related. When I was doing the translation to Mandarin for Adam's online website, of course. So yeah, and so much appreciated for this first premiere the first session of the whole program today. So thank you, Angela, and thank you, Jason,
Thank
and
you.
thank you for online audiences members that have been still staying with us. Thank you so much. And so if you like this program, or if you have just discovered, feel free to share with your friends or colleagues wherever you are from. And then from today until this weekend, we are going to present the entire program of Angela's curation. Thank you so much. Thank you.